On today's podcast, we have the privilege of speaking with Roland Kluger, a veteran in the music industry known for his insights on music publishing and music rights. Roland shares his thoughts on the potential of AI to revolutionize music's applications, from enhanced playlists to medical uses, making the pie for everyone bigger. We'll dive into the complexities of diversifying music rights, the future of digital platforms, and the intriguing world of AI-generated shows. Plus, we'll touch on the new revenue streams arising from hologram tours featuring icons like Amy Winehouse and Whitney Houston. This is an episode packed with insightful discussions on global copyright protection, emerging markets, and much, much more. Insiders, are you ready?
Welcome to MUBUTV's Music Business Insider Podcast, where our mission is to educate, empower, and engage artists and music business professionals who are dedicated to having a successful career in the new music industry. Here are your hosts, Ritch, Esra, and Eric Knight. Welcome back, Insiders, to another episode of the MUBUTV Music Business Insider Podcast, where our mission is to educate, empower, and engage your music career. On today's episode, we dive deep into the future of music with industry veteran Roland Kluger. We explore the game-changing potential of AI in music, from innovative uses in playlist curation to its impact on global copyright protection. Roland also opens up about the complex world of acquiring music rights, the rise of hologram concerts with icons such as Whitney Houston and Amy Winehouse, and the challenges emerging markets like China and India face in copyright law. We also discuss the intricacies of managing large-scale music catalogs and the shifts in the role of performance rights organizations as the music industry globalizes. Roland offers insightful advice for aspiring musicians and shares his predictions for how AI will expand and transform the music industry. You don't want to miss it.
Welcome back, Insiders. Today's featured guest is Roland Kluger, a music industry executive with many years involved in the industry and with a special emphasis on music publishing and catalog acquisition. This was, I thought, a fascinating conversation, and one, by the way, Eric, that we've never explored on this channel in our show. We have not done this. And it's very, very interesting for a multitude of reasons, not the least of which is that, as you and I are always talking, people need artists, all of you out there, need to have an understanding of the value of your songs, the value of copyrights. And at the heart of this conversation was that, is about the value of your copyrights and of your songs. And one of the most important things that I thought he talked about in this atmosphere that we're in, where so many name artists, big name artists, as well as people that we don't know, are selling their rights completely outright, which never was done before. When you look at, songwriting, there's like two parts to the song. There's the publishing part and the songwriting part. You always own the songwriting part, and you own the publishing part until you sell it, okay? But now we're seeing people just sell their entire pie.
Yeah, we just had the latest one, I think, was Daddy Yankee, that he just announced a $200 million deal with Concord.
Whole catalog.
Right.
And his rights, and his royalties, and his masters, and his songwriting, and the images. I mean, it was the same exact type of deal that Queen did with Sony, okay? And this is what I thought was so interesting, is that, Roland spoke about investment strategies and in music rights, totally dependent on the amount of money that you had to spend, that has become a very big factor in it. Meaning, what is the multiple they're going to give you? Are they going to give you 8 times your yearly income? 10 times? 15 times? 20 times?
Right.
And often that gets into the understanding of, the value of your music. This is why, Insiders, you have to have a knowledge of your songs. This is your retirement. Remember, songs are forever. They last as long as you live, plus 70 years after your death. That's how long a copyright lasts. So you can see there's a lot of potential to make money. Freddie Mercury died 34 years ago.
1991 or something like that.
33 years ago. And that catalog is still generating money for his
I think that was the highest acquisition ever, $1 billion.
It was 1.2.
Right,
yes,
even over Pink
highest.
Floyd. Yeah, it was unbelievable.
Which we'll talk about, but that there was a major distinction in the Pink Floyd and the Queen.
Yeah, and one of the other aspects of this, speaking of that, is about posthumous career management and managing posthumous careers, which is something that we've talked about in a couple of other episodes.
Yeah,
where it can be very lucrative and seen as with acts such as Kiss selling their entire catalog for future hologram shows, upcoming tours featuring holograms of deceased artists like Amy Winehouse, which we've talked about, that's getting ready to come out with something, and also Whitney Houston are other revenue avenues that we spoke about on this podcast. And it goes back to this whole rethinking. And I think we talked about this with Don Passman even. And I asked him the question, do you think that contracts are going to be rewritten now for those things? And he says, God, I hope not. But it's an interesting thing because these are things now that that artists are having to take into consideration. What do I want to do with my career once I'm gone? What is my legacy going to be? And you're seeing this happening, this ongoing trend.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, Kiss is setting themselves up for, they want their career. They've retired from performing, but they want their career to continue beyond that. ABBA has the show running in London now, Voyage, which is
probably the most successful of
and
all
people
this.
are actually paying real money to go into a theater to see that 2-hour show. I mean, I was reading an article about it yesterday where it's made something like $139 million in ticket sales already, and that's from one venue, over a year's period of time that people are willing to do that. So it's a very interesting aspect. The other thing that he talked about that I thought was really interesting was that, when you're acquiring music rights, it's very complex because it includes the need for both publishing rights and master recordings. And this is what, you were making the comparison a minute ago when you talked about the Queen deal versus the Pink Floyd deal. The major difference between those two deals, not in monetary terms, but it affects this monetarily, is the fact that Pink Floyd did not sell their publishing.
Right.
Now, what's significant is that publishing controls. You can't license the master or the songs or use it in a commercial unless you have that particular right.
Which I think is probably why they did that, to kind of make sure that they still have that ultimate decision-making power.
Or their estate does when they're gone.
When they're gone.
Which is a very interesting component in those kinds of deals.
Right.
Most everyone, Springsteen, and it's not that they don't have approval, but they've sold the whole kit and caboodle. Paul Simon.
Right.
Everybody has. I can't think of one of those massive kinds of deals where they've sold everything but the publishing. Pink Floyd made that exception.
Right. And it'll be interesting to see how that plays out in terms of what kind of
usages
they do. And I think they call that moral rights, is what we were talking about in the show.
Exactly.
And
it's very interesting.
And I'd love to be a fly on the wall to just look at the stipulations in some of these contracts of what they can or cannot do in terms of, what kind of usages they can use. I'm sure that's all been stipulated in those moral rights clauses in those contracts. One of the other points that I thought was really great was investing in new artists. And what he talked about, investing in new artists is speculative, much like the stock market is. And artists must view their work as a business, offering their music as a commodity for financial backing to advance their careers. And we talked about this, I think, also with David Shuloff over at Music, which is another episode that everybody's going to get to hear, which will be very interesting. And so I thought that's a very interesting way to look at things, because I think we're going more to that model.
Much more so to that model. And, Roland talked about certain points in that as well, which I thought were really, really interesting.
So with that, insiders, sit back, relax, and enjoy our featured conversation with Roland Kluger.
Roland, welcome.
Thank you.
I want to start this off with you because of what you do. The concept of purchasing and exploiting the music publishing rights to songs was something that was previously the job of music publishers. And, what we started to see over the last 10 years with companies like Hypnosis or Primary Wave and others, including major publishers like Sony and Universal, it was a shift to include all income sources. That was something new. In some cases it was, publishing and songwriter royalties, and in some cases, master income and producer royalties as well. What do you feel, being someone in this space, what do you feel brought about this shift, that it was not the way that it was done previously? What are your thoughts on that?
I would say to some extent, if you look in the past, that's the way it was. The publishers were collecting the mechanical rights on the right. They were also getting into production. They were doing their own masters and things like that. So that model hasn't really changed that much. What has really changed is the magnitude, the amount, because you will, years back, publishers were selling their companies, but it was small deals compared to today. I think streaming changed everything. And then the income from the other sources are also very important. So all of a sudden, it's a different business. And I think also the business changed from the outside, because in the early days, a publisher could not really be financed. He had to use his money like a small business. And now it's a completely different ballgame. The financial world is looking at it and is starting to invest. So that changed the rules. But the basics are pretty much the same. Does it make sense?
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. I wanted to ask you, as the landscape shifts to include all income sources from music rights, how have valuation models for music catalogs evolved? Are there new metrics or factors you think investors should be focusing on?
Well, I think the deals are getting very sophisticated. I think the basics of the deal is to use a multiple. When you hear people talking about deals, they will really talk only about the multiple. They will say, well, publisher share, this share, the average, and then you give a multiple. Now, because the artists or the writers and artists, they have more than just their music. You got the concerts, you got the fan clubs, you got a lot of different incomes. And you remember, like 10 years ago, the record companies were talking about 360 degrees. Well, that's what they're using now in the investment. So as far as the formula is concerned, obviously it's getting more sophisticated. When you read about the deal about Queen, well, the 1 billion, it includes the pictures, it includes the trademark, it includes a lot of things. So that it's a whole. Also the concept and things like that make a big difference.
Yeah, interesting. It's kind of like the Pink Floyd deal that just went through right now that I think was like 400 million, and I think they took everything with the name, but the publishing, correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So that was unheard before. So I think that's also because the amounts are big. The numbers are getting very, very big. And that's why it has to become sophisticated.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear you say that, because I think that part of the thing is that the numbers are very big, but they're big for these kinds of legendary or cultural institutions like Queen, like Pink Floyd. There are several that have said that they won't do deals like this. Elton John has said they won't.
Sure.
Mick Jagger said, that they haven't made that decision. They said they may give it all to charity. They're not sure yet. So those kinds of deals, are the numbers are astronomical. And I wanted to ask you another question on that. When you are assessing catalogs, or when investors are assessing catalogs, what factors do you look at to account for longevity? And, is the cultural relevance of songs and artists or a catalog something that you consider more now than in previous eras?
It's hard to say. I think what you just mentioned were the huge hits. And then you got a kind of a mid-market for one hit here, one hit there. And then I would say you're back to the old-time formula. You will just look at the publishing income, master income, and you will use a multiple. Then you're back to very basic deals. It's not that sophisticated. Now, the question of every buyer has his own approach. Is it a passive deal? You just want to collect and take care of the administration? Is an active deal, like the major, Universal, Sony, etc.? So that's the first thing. And you got on one hand the buyer, the seller also. Why is he selling? Very often, in some cases, they need the money. Otherwise, it's also sometimes a question of it's the end of a period and they want to get rid of it, make money out of it, and go to the next phase. Or they need the money to create a foundation for their family, their children, how to pass the buck to the next generation. So it's very hard to find a formula. So now the question of longevity, obviously you got a lot of time to go. even if you miscalculate, you got that 70 years for publishing, the publishing, you got the time the master rights have a longevity. And the users of the music, they're getting so new things that, TikTok was not on the board 5 years ago. And now it's a major factor. Maybe AI will also change completely the game, and new territories like China, India, and so on. So that I think there's still a lot of growth to come.
Roland, what's the distinction in criteria when you're considering a publishing catalog versus like a catalog by a single artist or songwriter?
It's not really a big difference. It depends on the content. Were they hits? What did they generate? Is there any chance that they will come back in sync, in film? If it's an artist, it's more tied up to the personality of the artist. Will they come back on Netflix? Will things like that happen? It depends what kind of iconic is the artist. So it's very hard to catalog. It depends, what the content, which writers were involved, and that the public is not so much aware of the writers and things like that. Where an artist, a Presley or a Baccarat, there have been pictures, you will mention Elton John and things like that, a lot have to do with their pictures too. So it's a different story.
Yeah, it is a different story. I mean, some people feel very close to it and just want to pass it on to their children and so forth, which is, I guess, traditionally what was done, where people held on to those rights, and others, as you say, want to, get rid of it. I want to ask you another question on another facet of what you deal with. How are differing regulatory environments, such as Europe's, evolving copyright laws and U.S. regulations, how are they shaping the future of music rights acquisitions? What barriers exist in ensuring a more globally cohesive framework?
Well, I would say that obviously between Europe and America, there are some basic differences.
Yes.
The copyright are in France, it's rather the protection. But I think if you look at it globally, rights are pretty well protected, and more territories are protecting the rights. I think the issue will be how they will approach the ChatGPT, AI, and things like that. That will be, I think, the next challenge to come. For the past, I think the regulations are getting more or less like China has no copyright law yet, but it will come one day. India the same. They will join the club within years to come. But if you look at America and Europe, yes, there are differences. The approach is there, but the protection, the longevity is there, and it's not very much different. In some cases, like for masters, the protection in the US is better or it's larger than it is in Europe, because you got that window after 40 years where you haven't got the chance to get back your master. That does not exist in Europe. So, where it also can make a difference is the fiscal situation, because like when Americans come over and want to buy European copyrights or corporation and things like that, the tax situation can make a big difference versus to when you got the competition from local players, it could be a disadvantage. You see, the tax grid.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. That's the different regulatory bodies that would affect that.
Roland, for veteran artists selling their catalogs, how important is wealth transmission in their decision-making process? And are we seeing an increase in catalog sales due to estate planning concerns, or is it more about cashing out at peak valuation? I mean, you kind of touched on it, but I'd be curious to get your thoughts on that.
I would say both situations. I think some artists or writers or publishers will feel this is the right time to sell, because all the numbers going around and they hear their friends have sold for so much money. That's one side. The other side is people getting, where you see the acts who did the Paul Simon, the Bob Dylan, there in the 70s, early 80s. I think that it has to do with a plan for their children, not their children. Something about how they look at protection as a burden, and the fact that the moral right is there, and that needs to be watched. Some feel it's a burden to leave that to the next generation, assuming they have the ability to do so. So some feel it's better to leave money, or in some cases also create a foundation to say, I want to do this, I want to do that. It's a nice tax situation, again, more in the States than in Europe. But I think that's part of the plan. So you got a couple of different scenarios. That's it.
Yeah, it's very true. I mean, when you think of like a Paul Simon or a Bob Dylan, those are, I think, two people that you mentioned just now. I mean, you're in that business. You're on the front lines of that world, Roland. You can imagine one of his children taking over that. That is a full-time job. I mean, there's no question. It's a 60-year catalog. It's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of songs. And it's, just the administration and the maintenance and the upkeep and the licenses and all of that. That's like a full-time, job. And I think the same thing with like somebody like Springsteen or...
And I'm sure they're trying to do it for like avoiding infighting within the family possibly as well, too. Yeah. Who knows?
Sure. Yeah. So it's interesting.
But I think it's not... I think administration can be handled. But I think the fact that there are so many new opportunities and they have to say yes or no.
Yes.
There's publishing, there's a campaign, there's this, cosmetic. I mean, they are being approached by so many angles that can generate money and big money. But still some say, no, we don't want to do that. Because that's kind of a moral right not to touch it. And some people I know feel like it's a big burden to leave it to the next generation. Even more, not so much of the work, but the fact that who is going to be able to say this is right and this is wrong.
Right, and I would assume for somebody like a Pink Floyd, let's say, for instance, that's very, I don't know if they've released anything. Has anything ever been licensed on Pink Floyd on a soundtrack or a movie?
Oh, yeah.
I think a couple of things.
Different
but
songs
but I would assume, and maybe Roland could answer, you don't have to give names or anything, but I'd be curious, those must be much more complicated issues where Pink Floyd maybe in advance has said, we don't want our stuff being used on this type of stuff, on that type of stuff. Exactly. Could you talk about a little bit about that more?
Well, yes, I think that moral right is more important in Europe than in this. Like in Delaware, there's no moral right. That doesn't exist. But in Europe, it's a very important right. And it's also a right that you cannot, even if somebody buys a song or a catalog, the moral right stays with the writer, even if it's being sold. So that's always a problem. Okay, not a problem. Could be a problem, an issue. The fact that one will say yes, the other will say no. Also the fact now that a lot of songs, you got 4 or 5 different publishers of the song. So when you have to do a thing, all have to agree. So you imagine in a couple of more years, those 5 publishers will have estates, heirs, and things like that. I mean, just to get an okay for film or thing will become hell.
Right, and then you think about how much money the company's invested in that catalog. I'm wondering, how do they assess, is that going to be something that's going to be profitable for them in the long run?
Exactly.
I want to ask you another aspect of this, Roland, which is how do the roles of the PROs like CSAC or BMI and their European counterparts affect how artists and investors engage with music rights? I mean, could changes in these entities reshape the balance of power in the music industry as far as the investment aspect? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think, first thing, the pros, have changed to the extent that now you got for-profit pros in the U.S. You got CSAC, BMI now. So these are pros for profit, which would be something unthinkable for us in Europe.
Okay.
I still think. So that's one side. The other side is that the pros are getting more and more effective, and they've got great systems, and they're giving more and more information out. So that basically, if you take SACEM, for instance, they can give to their writers, their members, access to a lot of information. And the information will become better and better, so that if you represent a writer or a publisher, you are able to have a lot of data that you can use. And the same data can be used by the buyer. So just on that side, the pro give a chance to have very sophisticated information that did not exist 10 years ago. So the data becomes a major factor in all those deals in the way they assess the value of the copyright.
Roland, with emerging markets like China and India growing, how do you anticipate the rise of new platforms or regulatory frameworks in these regions influencing global music rights acquisition?
How to say? I think, if you take a country like Korea, who would have thought that it would become such a major player and up, on their own market, being able to export and now becoming an investor in music and things like that. So that was, you couldn't foresee that, I would say, 10 years ago. India is already a big market with the films, Bollywood and all that, and music is being used. The question is, how do you collect the money? When do they start to pay? And this is a long way to go. In China, the same thing. But you almost start from scratch. So any income multiplied by 1 billion people will be generating a lot of money. And also, I think if you look at Korea, the fact that the music is being exported, I think the countries will decide to have a copyright law just to have their songs protected when they are being exported so that the money can come back. So they will join the system of the pro within, that is, I don't know, I guess 20, 30 years from now, before the system really, although things do happen faster than foreseen. So, but when you see how big the market is in China, it's incredible.
Yeah, I would think that, with markets like China, which are just beginning to emerge, and India as well, I would think that it would be a little faster than 20 years. I would think probably within the next decade. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, but it's a great point you're bringing up, which is that there is no infrastructure. I mean, they're massive markets, but they only can be beneficial to the world if there's an infrastructure to, take advantage of the market. And right now, that's, the point you were making. There's not an infrastructure for that at all.
You're starting to see that more in Africa now, where that infrastructure is being put in place, where all the major labels are coming into play.
And investing.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
I was going to mention Africa.
Yes.
Nobody talks about that there.
Yeah.
That's also huge. A lot of the music comes from there. And also you got 1 billion people there. So that's where the increases will come in the next 10 years, that's for sure.
Oh, absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. I think, one of the things that I'm always teaching my students is that the growth of the music business on a global level will come from the international markets, not from the United States, for the simple reason that the United States and Europe, for that matter, have been established and, firmly entrenched for 60, 70 years. And it's not like we've gone down. It's that everybody else has come up. Everybody else has developed their systems now. I mean, look at Latin America. Look at, like you said, Korea. Look what's going on in Africa. Look what's going on in South America. Look what's going on in Eastern Europe, and the MENA territories, the Middle East, North Africa. I mean, it's, and Southeast Asia. I mean, it's remarkable when you look at the growth year over year over year. It's quite significant. And it's
I call it the first mover advantage. We were the Netflix for 60 or 70 years, and now the competition is coming around. Now you've got Hulu, everybody else coming into play.
Well, one question will also be, will it be to the advantage of the American music? Up to now, America is the number one market, but also was exporting.
Yes.
And the question is, will there be where you take in Europe, you got what they call the local market, French repertoire, German repertoire, how big the other repertoire, like when you go to Netflix now, is because of the subtitles, which is accepted. All of a sudden, film coming out of South of Korea are becoming huge hits. Even French films in French are, and most probably what is coming next is the language will change automatically through the AI. So that again, what impact will it have on music from where it comes? That's also an interesting thing. I don't have the answer.
Yeah, I plan to get into that with you. We were going to be asking you about that, but I wanted to ask you another question on within your business. New platforms like Royalty Exchange and others are opening up the sale of music rights to smaller investors. And from your point of view, Roland, do you see, or do you foresee any challenges with the democratization in terms of market volatility or oversaturation or quality control with this kind of element coming into the market?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting approach. How it will go, I don't know, because when you're going to doing, I would say, an acquisition, a normal deal, buying, selling, so much time and money is being put in auditing that you wonder what will happen with the deals where you invest $100, $1,000. I don't know. But on the other hand, it opens the market. People all of a sudden that had never thought about investing in music will, and it shows that there's something there. I don't know if it's ripe yet, but it's certainly an interesting thing that it opens the value, the asset of music in a completely different form. You have even the companies now paying advances in 4 clicks. So there are a lot of new models coming in. What will be their long-term impact? It's hard to say, but it is fascinating, kind of a democratization. And also for artists, it's interesting because they can get their money quite fast. It's a different approach. It doesn't have to be, you can sell part of your asset and use it for tours, for promotion. It gives, I think, certainly back to the artists, to the creators, because they can use the income and do different things, not have to wait a statement, an advance. And in fact, you can look at it and say that it replaced the system where, some of the Stones, the Beatles, companies were giving them advance. They were paying the cost to do the recordings. Now the artists say, okay, I own my master, I own my publishing. And then they have to organize their gigs. And they might need money for their van or something. This they can have through those systems. So that it changes again the relationship of the artist and the majors. They are most probably small markets will generate like that, and it will create or give opportunities to new artists and to the market that way. Being financed, they're going to finance themselves.
Exactly.
And that's interesting.
Yeah, it's very interesting. It reminds me, I come from an A&R background, and it reminds me of, it's kind of similar in that it's a faith-based model when you're talking about new artists, because they don't have track records. They don't have a history of, 50 or 40 or 30 years of songs and albums that have a history of generating income, and you can sort of, predict on the model. You're basing it on, I guess it's speculation, on how much you like this artist or want to invest.
It's almost like the stock market. It's a commoditization of the music.
Yeah, of the music and of the artist.
Of the artist too, exactly.
Yeah, you're investing in an artist. Yeah. So, it's interesting.
Well, also, it looks the other way around. The artist is investing in himself, because it's like a business. Instead of going to the bank, all of a sudden you got a song that you can sell on these markets for $1,000, $5,000. They don't, at that stage, they're in their 20s. They have no idea of what assets means.
Right.
They don't know the value. The only thing they know that if they go to a bank, they'll get nothing. All of a sudden, because they've had one hit or they've done this and that, they can get money straight away and go for the next step. Make a new album, go into the studio, and own the right. That's also the question of ownership. When you think of all these groups that, all the recordings were paid by the record company.
Right.
So to some extent, they don't own the master. They have a bad or losing a royalty deal. They've changed it, improved it. But basically, you're looking at that in the 60s, 70s, they were taken for a ride. Some very good lawyers who worked out the deals with that the artists own the recording. That made also a big difference.
Yes, exactly.
The question of ownership. In the early days, that was of no meaning. Ownership, who cares? Now, if people realize that, the rappers and what these people, they understand that this has a value today or later. And they're also they don't do only music. They will do cosmetic, they will do clothing, they will do, cheese or whatever. They use their names. And all of a sudden, it's a different ballgame.
Yeah, they become their own cottage industry, in effect.
Yeah, exactly.
And many have. I mean, as you were speaking about that in the old days, that, the ownership aspect was foreign to most people. I remember, I believe the very first artist to ever realize that value and to actually put it into practice was the Rolling Stones in 1971 when they changed labels. They went to Atlantic and owned every single thing they did from Sticky Fingers forward, which is, that was unusual in that era.
Yeah, but that's not that. That's the reason that they had a good lawyer, a good agent. These people help them to take them to the next step. And I think that makes a big difference. Certain groups didn't have all the money on it, but they had the agents and the lawyers who were negotiating that made, so that's also a big difference.
Roland, I want to ask you, what role do tax laws and benefits play when an artist decides to sell their catalog? Are there incentives for artists and songwriters to hold or sell depending on their current tax environments?
I'm sure they are. I mean, but then you go country by country. It's a different story. The way they are treated. I mean, in America, it's certainly a big break if you create your foundation, pass the money to it, and things like that. So every system is different. Like in France, you could be using foundation that if you do certain things like create a foundation to make research on cancer or something like that, you will get a pretty big deduction because you're doing that. In the way tax structure, the estate will be taxed later on and things like that. So I think, but that becomes, even I guess in the US, state by state is different. If you're in Delaware or if you're in LA, or it's the rules are different. It's same thing as for a company. So I think the tax really makes a big difference.
Yes, definitely it does. Roland, do you believe that there's potential for deeper collaboration between traditional labels, record labels, and some of these more modern platforms like blockchain and smart contracts? Or are they inherently, competing models?
Don't you think that is certain with the time? The record companies seem to be able to always use them as a different media. That media promoting artists. And where artists get to a certain stage, the record company, or I don't know if they are still called record companies, or let's say Universal, would walk in and will make deals because they have proven value. They represent something. So all these platforms, I don't know, could you compare them to what was the radio 50 years ago, doing the promotion one way or the other?
Well, I mean, that's what you were talking about at the beginning of our conversation when you brought up, streaming and the introduction of streaming. Streaming only came to America in 2011. So, that as you pointed out, dramatically changed the economic nature of your business. I mean, literally changed it.
Absolutely.
Because, So, I mean, what you're saying is that a lot of these platforms, maybe if something new or innovative got invented, it might change the economic relationship or model.
Yes, and it makes it grow. Generally, in the beginning, like they don't pay the royalties, they don't pay this, and then it takes 5 years, 10 years, and then they end up paying.
Roland, with the advent of AI, what impact do you feel that it will have on the acquisition and sale of music assets, particularly how it will influence the value and cash flow of music rights?
Well, I think there's a lot of problems tied up to AI. The fact that AI will be using music, protected music, and how will be distributed, how will the pros do that? But I think it will, AI, if you look at it in a positive way, because the negative way is to say, well, AI will destroy music, there will be no new singers, no new composers, end of the game. That is the worst scenario. If you look at it in a positive way, AI will be able to grow some market, will make selection through like in sync or for libraries in a completely different way. But my feeling is that it will open new markets and it will open the use of music, like using like some years later, when you start using music in sport, that became also a way. Now using big songs to learn playing piano or instrument, that was never the case, and things like that. So I think AI will generate different uses of music, will make better playlists, will do, I don't know, based on a lot of things, so that people who use even more music, it will help people to go, even for medical use and things like that, music will be used, and stress, then whatever. I mean, so that things will come up which were unforeseen, so that for the value, back to your question, I think it will it will grow the value of the music. Pie will become bigger.
Yes, the pie will grow exponentially, which it leads me to another question that I want to ask you about that, based on the business that you do, which is, Roland, how important is diversification when acquiring rights across music publishing, master recordings, and other income streams? Do you foresee a greater emphasis on owning multiple types of rights moving forward, or do you see it staying within specific realms?
It really depends how much money you have available. If you got billions of dollars to spend, you will try to do deals across the board and do as many as possible, so that you have the advantage of the average. So if you make one good one, the usual thing, 1 out of 5, 1 out of 10, and money is unlimited, then you will try to place, that's where when big funds come in, they can decide that they will take a share, and that it becomes like a chess, or it becomes just an investment. It's a portfolio. You create your portfolio. Now, if Wall Street is the same thing. You can decide to only invest in tech, or you will invest in this pharmacy. It's the same thing. It's a question of approach. Are you looking for, speedy return? Is it a long-term approach? And then you create. I think it will be really much the same answer Goldman Sachs could give you on that matter. It's just about music, but it's the same thing. How much money do you have available? What kind of return do you want? Then you will be looking what gives you the better return: publishing, master, concerts, video game, I don't know. And then you will split and create your portfolio.
Yeah, because some of these deals that we've been talking about in this conversation, Eric brought up the Pink Floyd situation, and that does not include music publishing. And I'm just thinking that, somebody who's going to purchase that, that's a foundational element.
Right.
None of those masters can be used unless the publishing rights underneath those songs to get that master can be done. So that's not.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
that's why I'm wondering what. I guess ultimately it's their catalog, because they've been selling that on Sony for how long now?
Yeah, well, 50 years,
that keeps.
years,
They're hoping that that's going to continue to sell, and especially now that they've offered it on streaming models. So that's where I'm assuming they're probably thinking of.
But it's also, it's not only the catalog, it's the rights, it's the image, it's the future stories, it's the rights to put on a Broadway musical.
I'd be curious to see the moral rights for that.
Yeah. And they control the publishing. So it's.
But that's what I'm saying. So it's still that's why I'm saying it's such a unique position.
Yeah. Whereas the Queen.
Look at ABBA.
ABBA. Yeah.
Who they show in London.
Yes.
Right. And now the company in Sweden, they invested in a new act, which is Kiss. Who would have thought of that?
Yes.
So that all of a sudden, because the investor, or whatever you call him, has an approach, he has one model, and all of a sudden he looks for something very different, but still to apply the same model. You remember you had the Sydney Sunday out of Canada. They start with one show, and then they had 25 shows, or more, I don't remember, going all over the world. So all of a sudden, things like that do happen, and it opens something completely.
Yeah, the ABBA show Voyage was a brand new model, and it was a game changer in that a lot of times they have these AI, generated shows that are like one-offs where you'll see an act, but this was an ongoing enterprise where people were paying a fortune of money. I mean, tickets were like $150, $250.
Yes.
And when you go to the site to watch it, I mean, there's like a 2 or 3 minute, video of the show. It's unbelievable. It's, people in the audience.
I've seen it.
You've seen the show. So, it's absolutely remarkable that people will pay money for that. So it brings to mind, I mean, this was a conversation that I remember having with a couple of music attorneys 3-4 years ago, which was, they said, one of the conversations we're having with a lot of our clients these days is a question that I never thought I would face in my career. And I said, what's that? And he said, the question is, do they want their career to continue after they die? And it's like, who would have ever thought that? I mean, and yet what we're talking about is, I mean, and
Roland just brought this up with Kiss, because Kiss also just recently sold their catalog and their worldwide rights to everything, to the Sage company. And they've just done these holograms that they've done. And I think in the next couple of years, they're going to be doing something with the show.
2025, that show will debut, not until then.
Correct.
Because they wanted a break between the tour and the actual launch of that. But that's another thing. And it brings up a very interesting point of, money generation for acts that are no longer able to tour or are not with us anymore. It's really fascinating what people will pay for and what people, will be interested in. I understand there's going to be a tour next year of Amy Winehouse and Whitney Houston. Now, the Whitney Houston one is interesting because it's a Whitney Houston hologram, but they are real. They are real musicians on the stage playing the actual music. But I mean, it's an interesting concept when I think of, artists. This is somebody who's never going to get tired, never going to have a bad night, never going to be off key, never going to be hoarse or have lose their voice or sing off pitch or off. It's really remarkable. And for people that never got to see Whitney, I guess this would be a wonderful opportunity.
Yes, that's entertaining. It's entertaining. They will go to China and they will tour. There were guys who were playing the Beatles. And they toured for 20 years.
Yes. I remember that show. It was called Beatlemania.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And they made a nice living. But I'm sure they would be today, they would earn 10 times, 100 times more.
Correct.
And don't be too surprised if you see a Beatles thing coming like ABBA. I would assume something like that will be coming, like a AI-generated thing.
Yeah.
For sure. Roland, I wanted to ask you, throughout your life, we like to ask this of all of our insiders, have there been any books or films that you have found to be particularly inspiring that you can share with our audience?
Well, when I was in the music, I was always fascinated by the outside. I've always been fascinated by the fact that people, now it's changed because the industry is getting much, much bigger. And like there's a new generation of people coming from business school, etc. But in the early days, the feeling was it was a small business, and everybody thought it was unique in a way that there was no planning, no thinking. I think the record companies were a good example because they gave like the shuffleweight at the time to Steve Jobs, and you had to wait a streaming came to save the business, which was just going in drain. Because I think there was no planning, there was no coming from the outside. And I would say management, I was always fascinated by management, the mixture of management and legal. These are two factors which are, very important. Now, to bring it back to a book, there was a great book, unfortunately to remember the name, but the book was showing the impact of new inventions every 25 to 30 years. Like when you had silent film, and then all of a sudden you had with the voice, then the music, then radio came, and then every time there's a television came, and every time, and that changed completely the business. And every time the creators, the writers said, "Oh, that's the end of the story. We're gonna stop. There's no more room." Same thing as they say about AI. It's the end of the story. And then the good news was that they went, especially in Europe in the early days, to the legislators. And they said, we have to be protected because we are creators. We got, creation is going to disappear. And that's how you got the 50 years, the 70 years, and then the same thing happened in the States. And that's an interesting sight. That book was also explaining why, the records were like 2 or 3 minutes long, the singles, because 45 could only play 2 or 3 minutes.
Right.
And things like that. So, and then you had the format of the radio. But I don't remember the name, but that was a very good book because it was showing how technology, in fact, was changing the business. CDs, you can name them, you can do internet later on, but so that's the story, in fact, of the music industry, that every 20, 25 years, there's a big break and it changed the rules.
Yeah, it's almost like I look at those as revolutions, that they're revolutions.
Yes.
The revolution of streaming, that was a revolution. Mm-hmm. The revolution of going from a copy model to an access model, where we didn't buy CDs or cassettes or vinyl albums anymore. We merely, accessed whatever we wanted, wherever we wanted, however we wanted, on any number of devices we wanted, wherever we were on the planet, and we did it for free. That was a revolution.
Yeah.
And the important thing that I always remember about these changes that you're talking about, Roland, is that revolutions produce 2 outcomes. They produce a change of habits, and they produce a change of values. And in every one of those situations that you mentioned, that has occurred. There was a tremendous change of values when music went from, a radio to streaming, when we went from a copy model to an access model, where whether it was, Beyonce or the latest, band out of Paris, France, it was free. Nobody has to pay for that. So the revolution was around how do you monetize this? And we've seen that everything around the music, around the recorded music, got monetized. But the actual music, you don't have to buy that anymore. And, like what you were saying about, a 45, there was only so much space. That's the same reason for LPs. LPs could only hold 22 minutes per side.
Yes.
So, that was it. Very much
I
so.
had a good friend, Gerd Leonard, who was years back was saying,
wonderful,
like
yes.
water.
Futurist.
He's the futurist. Yeah, he's wonderful.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And he was a friend, and he was, talking about music as water. So he said, you got free water, and then you pay to get Perrier, this and this. So every time, so there are, and compared, he had a very interesting story about water, compare music to water. And that's I think very, very right.
Yes, very, very much so. Roland, what advice would you offer to someone who is interested in pursuing a career in today's music business?
To some extent, I've done a feeling that it's not that different than it was. It's always the same story to some extent. If you're a talent, to go on stage, you have to tour, you have to meet people, that's one thing. If you're the talent in the studio, you can be a studio producer. It's another approach. So I think the fact that an artist exists, it's there, you got that projection, that makes a difference. So that's different than it was years back. It's just, I think today, it's much more difficult because the competition, the numbers of acts, the music, there's so much music. How do you get noticed? How do you get promoted? That is, and that's, I think, an artist has to integrate. He has to learn how to use the tools. Or if he doesn't, he should have a good agent or person willing who knows how to handle that.
Yeah, very, very much so. I agree with you on that. And I think it actually goes deeper than just getting attention. I'm fond of saying that the most valuable commodity today is not the size of your company or how much money you put in or market share or power in the marketplace. It's the ability to get someone's attention. And I think that's the most valuable commodity because it's the one thing we can't buy anymore, not in this culture. We have too much choice. But to your point, which is very interesting, is that, I think today that's part of what I was talking about before when I said the values have changed. Getting attention, you have to understand the culture today. You have to understand what are the values that people actually connect with. And it's a very subtle but very profound, I think, realization when you understand that the things that attracted you to an artist in the 70s and 80s are not necessarily the same things that attract you to an artist today. And a lot of people don't get that connection. It's just...
Also, it's not the same people.
Correct.
The generation, basically, it's just every time you got a new generation, people in their teens, 20s, things like that. That's the market comes, and that's where you have to get attention.
Also, music is not driving the culture anymore like it once was. So that's another big thing.
You think so?
Yeah, I do think so. I don't think music is running the culture anymore. I think now it's tech. Tech has now become what music was in the 60s and 70s. That's kind of the voice of this generation. So I think music, as sadly as I hate to say it, has taken more of a backseat. It's still more, I think it's still more important as ever, but I think it's taken more of a backseat. I wanted to ask you, Roland, what's the best way to reach you? Somebody wants to reach out to you or get in touch. How do they connect?
Well, basically through emails. Like give a call, send a mail through LinkedIn. I would say these are the best, easiest way to reach me.
Okay, so through LinkedIn, they can get a hold of you.
Yeah, in fact, it is the easiest way.
Okay, wonderful. Roland, we cannot thank you enough for taking the time to speak with us.
Thank you.
We are very, very grateful to you. This was a very, very interesting conversation, and one that I've been wanting to have for a long time because it's such an interesting space around music and around rights and around the future and around the values and around the culture elements that are driving, the business that you're in. So thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us.
Well, thank you very much. I enjoyed it too.
So interesting. Wow.
Yeah.
Eric, I am so glad that we had Roland on because this is a topic that, we have not explored on this show before.
And one that's so top of mind and so current.
And so important for our insiders to understand about the value of songs, the legacy of songs in their own careers and how they last. So they're not just thinking about the immediacy, but about how those songs could be, utilized and have value for themselves and their families in their future.
Yeah.
One of the things that was the most, that stood out to me about this conversation with Roland is how, and this is something that I've been following for a long time, is how he felt that emerging markets like China and India, which are expected to develop a lot stronger copyright laws in the next 10 to 30 years, are really going to boost global music rights acquisition, despite the current challenges. I mean, right now, India and China don't have the kind of sophisticated copyright laws that we have in the United States or in Europe. They're not as codified. It's all very kind of like Wild West out there.
Right.
But the potential for those markets, how he was talking, is staggering in much the same way that we've seen the growth of the music industry grow outside the United States, especially in the last 15 years, more so than in the United States.
Yeah, and I also thought that, I've been big on this, harping on this with a lot of episodes, Africa's rising music industry. He says, Africa is becoming a significant player in the music industry thanks to the infrastructure investments by major labels, and that we can expect this to continue, this growth in the region. And, a lot of our listeners that are listening, believe it or not, are from Africa.
Yeah.
And we've already had a couple of guests like Fatima Mumba and several other people that were talking about this space. And I think we've even talked about the shows on CNN that we're seeing inside Africa and just how Africa is just becoming this global behemoth within the music industry and how the major labels are investing and putting offices in those regions.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, people think, Africa's not a monolith. Remember, I think it's 22 or 32 countries.
Right.
And then it's also divided by region. There's South Africa.
Right.
Then there's the Northern Africa, which is, in the music industry, they call those the MENA territories.
Right.
Middle East, North Africa, Saudi Arabia, Morocco, a lot of territories, which are developing very, very significant music scenes. And there's a lot of, Reservoir Media has had a lot of investment in that region. And we should definitely be speaking to them about that region because, that's a region of Africa that, is not, it's the northern region in the Middle East and North Africa. So, yeah, that's a very, very important one, like what we were saying before about the developing of new markets. China, the same thing. So it's going to produce a lot of great things. The other aspect of this conversation that was really fascinating to me, because you don't often hear about it in these conversations, is how he spoke about platforms like, Royalty Exchange and how they democratize the market, which is by allowing smaller investors to engage in music rights, That's a big shift, okay? And how it could change the artist label dynamics by offering artists quicker access to funds for independent projects. I think that was the way he put it. And that's a fascinating concept because it's kind of like, the way the stock market used to be. Well, that's for, those people,
right,
for wealthy or, and now it's like opening it all up,
right,
opening it up to where, you want to invest in this. Well, it's available for you to do. It's not just about the $300 or $400 or $500 million deals that a Springsteen or Paul Simon or Stevie Nicks does,
right,
but about getting involved on the ground floor and allowing more people to invest in a career. And I think this is healthy for artists because
right,
artists used to always have to rely on just the label for the money or just the publisher. And now, with technology, as we've spoken many times in this episode, where the democratization of technology, shall we say, has allowed a far, far greater amount of artists to have a career than at any other time in the music business history.
Yeah. And also, I thought that one of the other big ones that we talk about all the time here that you, Ritch, have been preaching about is about attention. And one of the things that he talked about was cultural values and attention.
Yeah.
And where he says that attracting attention is now the most valuable commodity, and understanding current cultural values is essential. While music no longer drives culture as tech does, it remains important, albeit in a different role. And I thought that was an interesting take on that.
Absolutely. And he's right on the money with that, and especially on the point that you just made about the cultural values. Okay. Not all cultures are identical and view things in the exact
Right.
same way. And that's an important distinction to understand, especially as we start talking about these conversations on a global basis with music. Music has a different role in different cultures and means different things. It's like, when we talk to Carl Congham or we talk to Andy Griffin, who talked about the cultural, do you remember that when he spoke about the cultural
In
distinctions?
the Southeastern markets, yeah.
Exactly. So those things matter. So we're heading into a very, very interesting time, and one that I think offers tremendous opportunities for, both artists and songwriters for the future.
Hey, Insiders, thanks so much for tuning into this episode. We really appreciate it. To get show notes, links, and everything that was mentioned during this interview, head on over to our official website at MUBUTV.com/podcast/show notes. If you're enjoying the content and what we're doing here on the show, please subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts from. And don't forget to rate and review our show at iTunes. 5-star reviews are always welcome and help to ensure that our podcast stands out on the top-rated and new and noteworthy charts on iTunes and our space. You can also find us at social media at Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter X, all ending with the handle MUBUTV, which is spelled MUBUTV. Don't forget to catch our flagship show, the MUBUTV Music Business Insider video series, airing every week on YouTube at youtube.com/MUBUTV. This show was produced and created by Ritch, Esra, and Eric Knight. Theme music by Disciples of Babylon, and be sure to tune in next week for another episode of the MUBUTV Music Business Insider Podcast.